Welcome to a little bit of a different video because I am so behind and it's already the end of October and I haven't filmed as much as I would like to this year. And because I've read a lot more books than I did last year, I don't want my end of the year wrap up to be an hour long. So I decided to start breaking it up into quarterly updates. So today I'm going to bring you the first quarter of 2021 and all of the books that I read. So I decided that the format that I really enjoy, or maybe I'm going to try one more time and hate, is giving you the name of the book, the author, a picture of the book, my rating, the genre, and a quote from the book, and maybe some additional thoughts on the book. So because I want to put all of those things about each book into the video, and I'm already over 125 books in this year, I figured let's start breaking it up, taking it quarter by quarter, and going from there. So the first book that I read this year is the book On Writing by Stephen King. This book is a memoir, and I rated it 5 stars. This book is Stephen King's autobiographical book that also has components of a writing manual and his philosophy on how he writes. And one of the quotes from the book is, "The scariest moment is right before you start." The next book that I read this year is Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. This book is a non-fiction book that dives into stories of outliers, people who were outside the norm on various measures, and I rated it 3.25 stars. The quote that I enjoyed or thought was important from this book is, "Practice isn't the thing you do once you're good. It's the thing you do that makes you good." The next book that I read in the first quarter of 2022 is Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams. This is a science fiction book, and it is third in his series, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I rated it 2.5 stars. It has a pretty funny quote, though. The quote goes, "The guide says there is an art to flying," said Ford, "or rather a knack. The knack lies in learning how to throw yourself at the ground and miss." The next book that I read was So Long and Thanks for All the Fish by Douglas Adams, which is the 4th book in the series, so it is also a science fiction book. This one I rated 2.5 stars, and the quote that I really enjoyed from this book is, "God's final message to his creation. We apologize for the inconvenience." The next book that I read in the first quarter of 2022 is Beach Read by Emily Henry, and it is the first romance book of the year. This is an enemies to lover, mortal nemesis to relationship kind of romance. But I enjoyed it. I rated it 3.25 stars, and the quote from it says, "He fit so perfectly in the love story I'd imagined for myself that I mistook him for the love of my life." The next book that I read in the first quarter of 2022 is North by Scott and Jenny Jurek. I rated this book 4.25 stars, and it is a non-fiction book that follows Scott Jurek's FKT, Fastest Known Time, attempt of the Appalachian Trail, and it's told from the perspective of him and his wife. I talked more in depth about my feelings about this book in my January wrap-up, so I won't go on too long about it. But the quote that I got from this book changed a lot for me. The quote is simple, and it says, "This is who I am, and this is what I do." And that is a mantra that I used for my ultramarathon training this year. Whenever things got hard, I would think to myself, this is who I am, and this is what I do. So in hindsight, I probably deserve to rate this book a little bit higher since it had such a big impact on me, and I did really enjoy listening to it while I was out running. The next book that I read in 2022 is What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami. I rated this book 2.25 stars, and it's categorized as a memoir. The quote that I took from the book is, "The fact that I'm me and no one else is one of my greatest assets." I thought that was a really good quote. As much as I might not have agreed with some of the author's perspectives, I enjoyed parts of this book. The next book that I finished in 2022 is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a mystery book that I rated 1.75 stars. This book follows the murder of a woman, and there's a lot of timeline crossing, a lot of characters. It's a very you have to pay a lot of attention in order to keep up with this book. The quote that I chose from this book is, "If this isn't hell, the devil is surely taking notes." And a little note that I put beside that quote is, this book was kind of a hell for me. The next book that I read in 2022 is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is categorized as a historical fiction. Taylor Jenkins Reid is a very popular author. Daisy Jones and the Six is some people's favorite book, and it follows a band across a time of their lives. And I rated it 2.75 stars. The quote that I chose from this book is, "I think you have to have faith in people before they earn it. Otherwise, it's not faith, right?" The 10th book that I read in 2022 is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This book is a contemporary fiction book, but it emphasizes some very important themes and goes a little bit in depth into racism, so I enjoyed that part. I rated it 2.5 stars though because it wasn't my favorite. The quote that I chose from this book is, "I don't need you to be mad that it happened. I need you to be mad that it just, happens." The next book that I read in 2022 is The Wolves of the Calla by Stephen King. This is the 4th book in the Dark Tower series, and it is categorized as a fantasy book because the Dark Tower is a fantasy series. I didn't enjoy this book as much as I was hoping to, but even so, it was an amazing book and I love that series. I rated it 4.25 stars, and I can't talk much about the plot because I don't want to spoil anything. The quote that I chose from the book is, "No one ever does live happily ever after, but we leave the children to find that out for themselves." The final book that I read in January of 2022 is I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a non-fiction memoir written by the author about her 17 encounters with near-death experiences, or 17 encounters with death. I rated it 2.75 stars, and the quote that I chose from this one is that the things in life which don't go to plan are usually more important, more formative in the long run than the things that do. In February, I started reading Stephen King again, so the next book that I read was 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which is categorized as a historical fiction, and this book follows the main character who time travels and attempts to prevent the JFK assassination, believing that preventing that would result in a better future. I rated this book 4 stars, and the quote from this book is, "We never know which lives we influence, or when, or why." The next book that I read in February of 2022 is Good to Go by Christy Ashwandon. This is a non-fiction book that covers a lot of topics of injury prevention, of recovery, and I rated this book 3.5 stars. And the quote that I chose from this book is, "It's more marketing than science." The next book that I read is Lullabies for Little Criminals by Heather O'Neill. This is classified as a contemporary fiction, and the plot follows a young girl through her life who suffers from a lot of abuse, who goes through some terrible experiences, and this book I rated 3.5 stars. The quote from it goes, "From the way that people have always talked about your heart being broken, it sort of seemed to be a one-time thing. Mine seemed to break all the time." The next book that I read is Grandma Gatewood's Walk by Ben Montgomery. This is a non-fiction book that follows the Appalachian Trail crossing, or the walk across the Appalachian Trail attempted by Grandma Gatewood, and I rated it 3 stars. In it, she says, "I would never have started this trip if I had known how tough it was, but I couldn't and wouldn't quit." The next book that I read in 2022 is Thinner by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. This book is categorized as a horror, and it's actually my first Richard Bachman book. I rated it 4.5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. The book follows our main character who gets cursed by a gypsy and begins to lose weight, and then we follow that story. The quote that I chose is, "The definition of an asshole is a guy who doesn't believe what he's seeing." The next book that I read in 2022 is Will by Will Smith, and this is Will Smith's memoir, autobiography. what I really enjoyed this book, and the reason I rated it 5 stars, is it goes very in depth into the history of rap, which was new to me. I didn't know much about it, and I really enjoyed the book. The quote that I chose from it is, "To place the responsibility for your happiness on anyone other than yourself is a recipe for misery." The next book that I read is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This book is categorized as a classic, and it follows the mental breakdown of the main character and her going mad, which if I had known I wouldn't have read because I don't enjoy those types of books, but alas, I rated it 1.5 stars, and the book, the quote that I chose is, "If you expect nothing from somebody, you are never disappointed." And yet, despite having no expectations of that book, I was still disappointed. The next book that I read in 2022 is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which is my first Agatha Christie novel. It is a mystery, as she is the queen of mystery. And this book, I mean, the plot is kind of in the title. Somebody gets murdered on the Orient Express, which is a train, and the detective on the train tries to find out who is responsible. The quote that I chose is, "The impossible could not have happened. Therefore, the impossible must be possible in spite of appearances." It's a little bit tricky to think about, but I thought it was a good quote. I rated this book 3 stars. However, given the fact that it was written in 1934, I think it deserves a bit more credit. The next book that I read in 2022 is What the Dog Saw by Malcolm Gladwell. This is a non-fiction book that is an accumulation of a lot of his writings that he has done for various newspapers, and I rated it 1.5 stars. I didn't enjoy the format. I didn't enjoy how disconnected the stories were, the essays were, so it wasn't my favorite. The quote that I chose from this book is, "What does it say about a society that it devotes more care and patience to the selection of those who handle its money than those who handle its children?" The next book that I read is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a non-fiction book that has a lot of trigger warnings, so I would read those before you went into it. But it does cover some of the abuse that Carmen Maria Machado has experienced, and I think is one of the first popular books that goes into the subject of abuse in non-straight relationships. I rated this book 3.5 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "Abusers do not need to be, and rarely are, cackling maniacs. They just need to want something and not care how they get it." The next book that I read is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This book is characterized as a horror, and I rated it 3.5 stars. This book is so complicated, I'm not even going to try to explain what it's about. But if you like messed up things, you'll probably like this book. The quote that I chose from this book is, "Sometimes a thought is closer to truth, to reality, than an action. You can say anything, you can do anything, but you can't fake a thought." The next book that I read in 2022 is The Song of Susanna, and this is the second last book in the Dark Tower series. It is characterized as a fantasy book, and I think it is one of my favorites in the series. I rated it 5 stars. I just loved how the author brought so many different things together in that book. It was just, for me, it was just perfection. The quote that I chose from it is, "Dead was the gift they kept on giving. Death, like diamonds, was forever." The next book that I read is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I rated this book 4.5 stars, and it is characterized as a mythology book. It is a Greek mythological retelling in the form of a novel. I had read Circe and the Song of Achilles, which I didn't love, but I really, really enjoyed Ariadne, and I love the quote that I chose from this book. The quote goes, "I would not let a man who knew the value of nothing make me doubt the value of myself." The next book that I read in 2022 is Dead Wake by Erik Larson. This is a non-fiction book. It is a historical book that describes the last crossing of the ship, the Lusitania. I rated this book 3.75 stars, and I really enjoyed it. It was very creepy. If you like ships and creepy things, this is going to be a good book for you. The quote that I chose from it is, "Man plans, God laughs." The next book that I read in 2022 is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This was one of my students' favorite books, so I had to read it for her. However, I rated it 3.25 stars. I didn't enjoy it as much as she did. This book is characterized as a thriller, but if there was a genre that is pretentious, that is what this book would be. It follows some students who go to a university that I don't even remember, and they study the classics, and they believe that studying the classics makes them very special. They have their own little clique, and anyway, go read the back of it if you're interested. It wasn't my favorite. The quote that I chose from it is, "Forgive me for all the things I did, but mostly for the ones I did not." The next book that I read in 2022 is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This is a contemporary fiction book that, like Such a Fun Age, has a lot of themes of racism and has some important conversations in it. I rated this book 3.25 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "She hadn't realized how long it takes to become somebody else, or how lonely it can be, living in a world not meant for you." The next book that I read in 2022 is Rage by Richard Bachman and Stephen King. This is categorized as a horror, and this is a banned book. It has been taken out of print by Stephen King himself because of the topic, which is a school shooting from the perspective of the school shooter. And the quote that I chose from it is, "Lunacy is when you can't see the seams where they stitch the world together anymore." The next book that I read in 2022 is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is categorized as a classic, and I did enjoy it. I rated it 3.5 stars, and the quote that I chose from it is, "The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame," which I thought was a really good quote, given that the book before it is considered immoral. So that was interesting. The final book that I read in the first quarter of 2022, the last book of March for 2022, is The Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates. This is a non-fiction book. It is written by the wife of Bill Gates and the co-founder of the Gates Foundation. They're known for their philanthropy, so I thought this would be a very interesting book. The quote that I chose from the book is, "Being a feminist means believing that every woman should be able to use her voice and pursue her potential, and that women and men should all work together to take down the barriers and end the biases that still hold women back." All right, those are the books for the first quarter of 2022. There are 3 more quarters to go. I'm going to do my best to get these out into the world as soon as I possibly can, but it feels good to kind of review them, look back on the year, reflect on some of the quotes, and on some of the books that have really impacted me. So that's all from now. Look forward to the second quarter or an October wrap-up. Bye.